Welcome, dear listeners, to another captivating mystery. Before we begin today's story, I invite you to subscribe to the channel and tap the notification bell so you never miss a new release. We post 2 gripping audiobooks every week, filled with suspense, secrets, and unforgettable characters. Your support helps us bring these stories to life, and your comments and thoughts are always welcome. Now settle in and let's begin today's mystery. The Persian Cipher. Chapter 1. Death of a Diplomat. It was a rainy day in London. A sharp wind tugged at the coat of Inspector Harold Price as he stepped out of his black motor car, glancing up at the towering facade of number 17, Wrexham Crescent, a residence belonging to Sir Julian Trent, senior attaché at the Foreign Office. A uniformed constable raised his cap as Price approached the polished brass door, now ajar. "Evening, sir. Bodies upstairs. Drawing room? No signs of forced entry." Inspector Price nodded, his eyes briefly scanning the vestibule. It was a stately townhouse, adorned with Persian rugs and a ticking regulator clock that echoed through the otherwise still silence. Inside the drawing room, the scene was strangely orderly. Sir Julian sat slumped in a high-backed leather chair, one arm hanging limp, the other resting across a folder containing a cipher scroll, partially unrolled, its brittle paper inscribed with fine calligraphy and intricate symbols. The hearth was cold. A decanter of claret stood untouched beside a pair of half-polished spectacles. The smell of ink, old vellum, and a faint trace of bergamot hung in the air. Dr. Renshaw, the attending medical officer, straightened as Price entered. "Time of death. Between 7 and 8 last evening. No signs of struggle. Heart failure at first glance, but..." Price raised a brow. "But?" The doctor gestured to the diplomat's lips. "Slight discoloration. Possibly poison. Something subtle. Likely ingested." "Who discovered the body?" "His valet. Found him this morning at precisely 9 o'clock. He'd gone to prepare his lordship's shaving water, returned and, well, this." Price turned his gaze to the fireplace mantel, where a telegraph form rested. Half written, the pen's ink had blotted, as though the hand writing it had paused abruptly. "To British Legation, Constantinople. Regarding Cipher K, shipment intercepted. Notify Fielding immediately. Code fragment enclosed. Do not send via wire." The rest trailed off. "Cipher K," murmured Price. His mind, already a machine of deduction, clicked into motion. Cipher K was a matter known only to a select few within the inner circles of Whitehall. It involved the encoding and decoding of sensitive communication between London and Her Majesty's consulates in the Middle East, especially Persia, where tensions over oil rights and Ottoman manoeuvring had recently intensified. "Where's the envelope this was to be enclosed in?" he asked. The valet, a wiry man with greying temples and a trembling demeanour, stepped forward. "Begging your pardon, sir. It wasn't in the room when I found him, nor the cipher scroll's translation notes. Sir Julian kept them beside him always, said it was too dangerous to leave in the hands of the clerks." Price turned toward the desk, empty. Not even an ashtray had been disturbed. Odd for a man like Trent, who was known for his fondness for pipe tobacco and midnight scribbles. Something had been cleaned, or taken. "Was anyone here last evening?" "Only Mr. Peter Hargrave, sir, from the Foreign Office. Came by at 6 and left, around 7:30. They were discussing Persia, I believe." Price's brow furrowed. Peter Hargrave, a polished young man, the rising star of the Eastern Affairs Department. Liked by diplomats, distrusted by clerks, educated in Oxford, served briefly in Tehran before returning to London on an assignment cloaked in silence. As Price surveyed the scene once more, his eyes fell upon a bronze letter opener resting atop a Persian folio. Oddly placed, the blade bore smudges of ink and Pete is something else. He reached for his handkerchief and lifted it gently. Blood, barely visible, but unmistakable. "Doctor, would you say the death could have been caused by a puncture wound?" Dr. Renshaw adjusted his glasses. "A sharp implement could have been used. There's a mark behind the left ear, nearly invisible. Most wouldn't notice it, but yes, it's possible. So it's not natural causes? No, Inspector, it's not. Price exhaled. Sir Julian Trent had been silenced, and whatever he was about to send to Constantinople would now never arrive. Somewhere between the half-written telegram, the missing translation, and the bloodied letter opener lay the truth. The case had transformed, not merely a murder, but a conspiracy. Chapter 2. The Cipher Scroll. By the time Inspector Harold Price returned to Scotland Yard, his boots were damp, and the rain had intensified into a cold, relentless drizzle. He paused at the door of his office, removed his coat with habitual precision, and lit the coal stove in the corner before settling at his desk. On the oak surface lay the evidence bag containing the cipher scroll taken from Sir Julian's lap. It was now safely wrapped and labelled, its intricate writing preserved with care. The scroll itself was old, centuries old, possibly Safavid era, judging by the style of the Persian script and the dark reddish ink. Across its aged parchment were sequences of numbers, geometric patterns, and symbols that bore no immediate logic to the untrained eye. Price, though not a linguist, was observant. One thing stood out immediately. There were numerical sequences interspersed with Persian phrases, but certain sequences had been underlined faintly, in pencil, clearly by Sir Julian himself. A knock on the door broke his concentration. Detective Sergeant Roland Meeks entered, a clipboard in hand and a cravat slightly askew. Inspector, I've compiled Sir Julian's immediate circle. Staff, frequent visitors, Foreign Office contacts, all here. And you were right about Hargrave. He was in Persia until last year, worked in Shiraz under Ambassador Langdon. Price gestured for him to sit. And about the poison? Dr. Renshaw just sent word. Confirmed. Digitalin, likely introduced in a drink or decanter. Leaves little taste and mimics heart failure. But here's the thing. No bottle in the study had any trace of it. Price steepled his fingers. Then it was brought in, administered, and taken away. Neat. Professional. Too neat, Meeks muttered. Price nodded. And Hargrave? Claims he left before dinner, saw no scroll. Said Trent seemed nervous but made no mention of Persia. He's requested a formal statement be taken at the Foreign Office. Good, we'll oblige. Price stood. Meeks were calling on an old friend, Dr. Ramin Farrokh, linguist, Oxford. I believe he's one of the few men in England who can decode this scroll properly. He once advised the Royal Museum on Persian cuneiform fragments. He'll meet us this afternoon. Dr. Ramin Farrokh, a tall man with iron-grey hair and a soft Persian accent, welcomed them into his study, a space that smelled of parchment and candle wax. Walls lined with books in Arabic, Farsi, Greek, and Latin enclosed the cosy room, where the hearth crackled softly and a cat slumbered on a Persian rug. He examined the scroll with reverence, adjusting his gold-rimmed spectacles. This is no ordinary document, Inspector, he murmured. This is part of a larger codex known as the Firebird Cipher, used by court scholars of Shah Abbas the Great. Most of it was thought lost. Only 3 fragments are known to exist, and this is a 4th. Remarkable. Price leaned forward. Can you translate it? Dr. Farrokh nodded slowly. Some of it, yes, but this is not merely language. It is encoded using a numeric cipher, a system possibly modified by Sir Julian himself. See here, this sequence, 27194, matches the date of the Anglo-Persian Treaty of 1903. These are not just words, they're events, dates, coordinates. Coordinates, Meeks echoed. Dr. Farrokh tapped the scroll gently. This portion refers to a vessel hidden in the southern waters of Hormuz, guarded by iron lions, possibly a code for naval movement or an arms shipment. And this? Here, it speaks of Fielding. You recognize the name? Price nodded grimly. Yes, Ambassador Reginald Fielding, currently posted in Tehran. The telegram Trent was writing named him as well. Then this is serious. This scroll may contain intelligence, coded military routes, names, operations. If it were to fall into enemy hands... It may already have, Price said darkly. And the man who might know more, was silenced. That evening, beneath the vast, echoing halls of the Foreign Office, Price and Meeks were led to the East Wing, where Peter Hargrave awaited them in a mahogany-panelled office lit by a green banker's lamp. Hargrave stood to greet them, his tailored suit pristine, his hands clasped loosely behind his back. "Inspector Price, how terribly unfortunate about Sir Julian. The entire department is in shock." Price didn't bother with pleasantries. "You visited Sir Julian the night he died. Why?" Hargrave smiled politely. "We were discussing an upcoming committee briefing, matters pertaining to communications with the Shah's envoys. Sir Julian was in possession of certain, shall we say, delicate translations from Persian sources. He didn't seem well." "You noticed nothing unusual?" Hargrave hesitated. "Only that he seemed distracted. He was writing something when I left. I didn't pry." Price took a step forward. "Did you see the scroll?" "I saw many scrolls, Inspector. Sir Julian was a collector. This one was centuries old, contained military-coded text, and went missing after your visit." Hargrave's expression tightened. "Are you accusing me of something?" "Not yet," Price said evenly. "But you were the last to see him alive, and you served in Persia. That's two threads I'm inclined to tug." Hargrave smiled again, cooler this time. "Then tug away, Inspector. But I'd advise caution. This is not a game played with lanterns in dusty libraries. We deal with nations, empires, oil, trade. People vanish in this world for reasons you won't find in a constable's report." Price didn't respond. Hargrave's words were a threat veiled in diplomacy, but more than that, they confirmed something. This was not just a murder, and Hargrave wasn't afraid because he was protected, either by the Foreign Office or by someone much worse. Returning to his office, Price found an unmarked envelope waiting on his desk. No stamp, no seal. Inside, a single slip of paper. "The man you seek wears two faces. One speaks in Whitehall, the other in Marseille." There was no signature, no watermark, just the faint scent of orange blossom, and something metallic. The game had changed again. Now the trail led across the channel. Chapter 3. Smoke and Mirrors at the Foreign Office. London's Foreign Office, a monument to British diplomacy and imperial control, stood like a granite guardian over Whitehall, its sandstone arches and classical columns as proud and immovable as the empire it served. On this chilly morning, Price was going to the Eastern Affairs Department, where policy and intrigue were often indistinguishable. Detective Sergeant Meeks walked beside him, flipping through a dossier with pages marked in blue ink. "Sir Julian's most recent correspondence," Meeks said in a low voice. 3 coded reports filed with the Foreign Office, all dated within the last 3 months. 2 marked confidential, the third eyes only. That last one was never officially logged. But we've got a line on who received it." "Let me guess," Price replied, not slowing his pace. "Hargrave." Meeks nodded grimly. "Filed under special assignment, a -3, labelled Project Windglass. No notes, just a routing slip with Hargrave's signature." Price's eyes narrowed. "Windglass? That's not diplomatic jargon. Sounds military." "Or worse," Price muttered. "Covert." They turned down a side corridor and stopped outside an office door marked Sir Hamilton Daltrey, Permanent Under-Secretary for Eastern Affairs. A dour man with thinning white hair and eyes like frost, Sir Hamilton was a fixture at the Foreign Office, legendary for surviving 3 governments and 2 scandals. His reputation was one of impenetrable discretion, and he regarded Price with all the warmth of a solicitor faced with a surprise audit. "I understand you've been asking questions about a highly sensitive matter," Sir Hamilton said, motioning for them to sit. "Sir Julian's passing is a tragedy, of course, but the matter is best handled discreetly." Price remained standing. "Sir, I'll be plain. Sir Julian was murdered. The weapon was digital in. His cipher work has vanished, and Peter Hargrave was the last to see him alive. I now have reason to believe this case involves espionage, quite possibly treason." Daltrey's gaze didn't flicker. "Espionage is an allegation that carries weight, Inspector. Make it without proof, and it's your career that will vanish. I don't deal in allegations, Price said flatly. Only facts, and the facts are mounting. Daltrey sighed and opened a drawer, retrieving a slim file. Project Windglass, he said, handing it over. Restricted even internally. Hargrave and Sir Julian were working with encoded diplomatic backchannels involving Persia. The situation there has grown unstable. There have been attempts to intercept British communiques. Windglass was developed as a countermeasure, a cipher based on ancient Persian encryption, far too complex for modern codebreakers. Price raised an eyebrow. So Sir Julian's scroll was a key. Correct, but that key is now missing. And if it falls into enemy hands, Meeks asked. Daltrey's mouth tightened. Then every covert message sent to our embassies from Tehran to Basra will be exposed. Lives would be lost, operations compromised. You understand now why this must remain under wraps. I understand perfectly, Price said. So what's in Marseille? That was the first time Sir Hamilton hesitated. I beg your pardon? An anonymous note reached me last night, Price said, pulling the slip from his coat. It suggests the man we seek wears two faces, one in Whitehall, one in Marseille. So I'll ask again, what's in Marseille? Daltrey studied the note, lips pursed. Finally, he replied, There's a man, Lucien Marchand, a broker. He operates through shipping manifests and coded contracts. He's known to deal in intelligence, packages, ciphers, information smuggled out of the Levant. We've suspected him of facilitating leaks to both the Ottomans and the Russians. And Hargrave? Daltrey paused again. We have no evidence connecting him to Marchand, but we know Hargrave travelled to Marseille 3 weeks ago, officially on diplomatic leave. He returned with no report. Price's voice was cold. Did he go alone? Daltrey shifted uncomfortably. No, he was accompanied by a woman, Celeste Duval, half French, half English, fluent in Farsi and Russian, formerly attached to the Paris desk at the Foreign Office, dismissed 2 years ago for unauthorised contact with foreign agents. Meeks leaned forward, and no one raised a flag when Hargrave brought her to France. Daltrey spread his hands. We have few operatives with her linguistic skills, and fewer willing to go where she dares. We made an error. Price straightened. Then I'll correct it. Meeks, book passage. We leave for Marseille tonight. As the inspector returned home to gather his things, a boy with a coal-smudged face darted across the cobblestones outside his building. He held out a folded piece of parchment. From a lady, sir. Said you'd understand. Price handed him a coin and unfolded the note beneath the gaslight. They think she's dead. She's not. She's waiting in the port quarter. Ask for the Silver Vulture, but beware, Hargrave has eyes in every shadow. There was no name, but once again, the faint trace of orange blossom lingered on the parchment. The inspector stood still in the fog, his breath clouding the air. Chapter 4. Passage to Marseille. The steamship Ariadne cut through the frigid waters of the English Channel with determined speed. Aboard it, Inspector Harold Price and Detective Sergeant Roland Meeks kept to themselves in a modest second-class cabin, reviewing notes and preparing for what lay ahead. As Price peered out of the salt-flecked porthole, he spoke quietly. There's a game being played, Meeks, and I'm beginning to think Hargrave isn't the only one holding the cards. Meeks, cross-legged on the bunk, was reading from an intelligence profile. Celeste Duval, born in Calais, educated in Geneva, recruited into the Foreign Office as a translator, dismissed for unverifiable communications with Russian envoys, but never arrested, never even interrogated. Price nodded, because someone at Whitehall still found her useful, or feared what she knew. They reached Marseille under a dull sky that threatened rain. The city teemed with its usual contradictions, opulence and poverty elbowing one another in narrow alleys, sea air mingling with the pungent aromas of spice, fish and smoke. The port quarter, the heart of this chaotic vibrancy, was where their investigation would begin. It was also where people disappeared. The tavern known as the Silver Vulture was tucked behind the Rue des Poissons, a filthy street where laundry lines hung like flags of surrender, and the gutters ran with brine and beer. Outside, an old sailor was playing a mournful accordion. Inside, smoke coiled thickly, the air reeking of absinthe and sweat. Conversations were whispered, eyes sharp and fleeting. Price and Meek stepped in and were greeted by silence, the kind that falls when strangers enter sacred territory. They approached the bar. Behind it stood a tall, dark-eyed woman, polishing glasses with deliberate ease. Price slid a coin across the wood. "We're looking for a woman named Celeste Duval." The woman stared at the coin, then at him. "She's not here." "But she's been here," Price replied, voice calm, "and she left word." A long pause. Then the woman leaned closer. "You speak like a man from the north." "London." "Then walk like one. Follow the alley 2 streets east. Look for a red curtain above the door. Knock twice. If you're expected, she'll answer." The building was barely standing, stucco cracked, windows blind with grime, but the red curtain fluttered like a flag above the door. Price knocked twice. The door opened just a sliver. "Inspector Price," came a voice like velvet over broken glass. "I hoped you would come." She stood in the shadows, Celeste Duval, exactly as Sir Hamilton had described her. Graceful, feline, with almond-shaped eyes and a whisper of danger in her every movement. Her hair was wrapped in a dark scarf, her blouse rumpled, but her poise was untouched. "Come quickly," she said, pulling them inside. "You've been followed." Inside, the rooms were dark and shuttered, maps pinned to the walls, books in Russian and Farsi scattered across a table, and a single candle burning beside a battered suitcase. She poured them strong coffee and lit a clove cigarette. "I was with Hargrave in Marseille," she admitted, "but I left when I realised what he was doing." "What was he doing?" Price asked. "Selling information," she said bluntly. "Not to the Russians, to a Persian intermediary, a man named Ali Karim, posing as a spice merchant. They met at the docks under the guise of trading opium and silk. But what was exchanged was far more valuable: coded copies of British military routes, the wind-glass cipher protocols, and details about naval shipments passing through Hormuz." "Do you have proof?" Meeks asked. "I have this," she said, pulling a photograph from beneath her blouse. Grainy but unmistakable, Hargrave handing over a leather folio to a tall bearded man beneath a pier. "And this." She opened a folded sheet, a translated extract from the Firebird cipher, one Sir Julian had been working on. The sequence matched part of the original scroll. Price studied it carefully. "Why come to me?" "Because I know Hargrave is having people followed," she said. "Killed. Sir Julian found out. That's why he died. And now Hargrave wants me silenced too. But I won't go back to London. If I do, I'll vanish." "What does Karim want with the cipher?" Price asked. Celeste hesitated. "There's more than just troop movements in that scroll. There's a code hidden within the code, an internal registry of British informants operating within Qajar Persia. Names, locations. Some are British nationals, others Persians working with us. If that registry reaches Tehran—" Price stiffened. "Then a dozen lives are at stake." She nodded. "And Hargrave will trade them all for gold and a diplomatic post in Constantinople." Suddenly a pane of glass shattered. Price was up in a flash, pistol drawn. Outside, footfalls echoed in the fog. "Go," Celeste whispered. "Out the back!" Meeks threw open the rear door, and they ducked into a narrow alley just as 2 shots rang out behind them. Meeks returned fire. Somewhere to the left, a figure bolted, a trench coat flapping behind him. Price gave chase. The alley twisted between shuttered warehouses and abandoned crates. The figure darted left, then right. At the edge of the quay, he slipped, and for the briefest moment, turned. It was the man from the photograph, Ali Karim. Then he vanished over the side of the dock into the mist below. By the time Price and Meeks went back to see Celeste, she was already packing. "I'll disappear tonight," she said. "You won't find me again, Inspector, but I've done my part. Karim is meeting Hargrave again, tomorrow night at the Villa Aubepine, outside Marseille. It's private, guarded, but if you want proof, that's your chance. Price gave a curt nod. And you? I'm a ghost now, she said with a sad smile. But maybe one day, the Foreign Office will stop chasing ghosts and start chasing the truth. And with that, she vanished into the Marseille night. The next morning, Price and Meek stood outside a rusting gate, overgrown with vines, overlooking a windswept cliff. Beyond it, the Villa Aubépine rose like a scar, abandoned, isolated, and quiet. Too quiet. Price adjusted his coat, eyes fixed on the silhouette of the house. Tomorrow night, Hargrave comes for the final exchange, he said, and we'll be waiting. But Inspector, Meek said, loading his pistol, what if Hargrave knows we're already here? Price gave a grim smile. Then let's make it a trap worth springing. Chapter 5. The Man with Two Names. Inspector Harold Price stood in the thicket below the southern slope of the villa, his dark overcoat blending into the dense cypress trees. The evening sun dipped low, casting long shadows over the earth, while the Mediterranean whispered below in rhythmic crashing sighs. Price adjusted his binoculars and peered toward the house. At the western side of the villa, a black automobile had just arrived. From it stepped Peter Hargrave, elegant as ever, in a tailored grey coat, gloves, and a look of precise detachment that Price recognised all too well. The expression of a man used to orchestrating betrayal and getting away with it. He's early, whispered Detective Sergeant Meeks, crouched beside him, pistol holstered beneath his coat. So are we, Price murmured. That gives us the advantage, if we move quietly. Inside the villa, Hargrave entered the drawing room with the calm assurance of someone walking into a second home. The table at the centre bore a decanter of arak and two heavy glasses. At the far end of the room stood Ali Karim, tall and severe, dressed in a tailored brown suit, his beard freshly trimmed, a lapel pin gleaming, a stylized lion and sun, emblem of the Persian monarchy. They did not shake hands. Instead, Karim pulled out a small leather-bound case and laid it on the table. Your final delivery, he said in accented English. Encrypted translation of the Firebird fragment. All pieces, all keys. You will find it complete. And the payment? Hargrave asked. Karim produced a thin ledger from his coat and turned it toward him. It listed a numbered account and the equivalent of £25,000 in gold bullion. Transfer will occur soon, Karim said. You will receive your reward and your post. Hargrave's lips curled faintly. Constantinople, then? Karim gave a nod. You've served the Shah well. Hargrave leaned over the folio with a faint flicker of satisfaction. Not the Shah, he said, just myself. From the woods, Price and Meeks crept silently toward the villa's side entrance, entering through a rusted greenhouse, where grapevines had long since overtaken the trellises. They advanced through cracked marble corridors and hallways thick with mildew, stopping behind a pair of doors slightly ajar. Through the gap, Price could hear the conversation. It is complete, Karim was saying. With this cipher, we will know every British move across the Persian Gulf. Fielding's network, naval reinforcements to Abadan, the fuel caches, everything. And you'll ensure my departure is swift? Hargrave asked. By morning, Karim said, pouring them both a drink. Price gave Meeks a sharp nod. He burst into the room, weapon raised. That's quite enough. Karim reached for his coat. Don't, Price warned. Meeks appeared from the other door, weapon drawn. Hands where I can see them, both of you. Hargrave, remarkably composed, leaned back in his chair. So, the hounds finally caught the scent, he murmured. Took you long enough. Price stepped forward, plucking the leather case from the table and flipping it open. Inside were the final decoded pages of the Firebird cipher, handwritten translations, British troop locations, oil transit routes, and names, many names. You were going to sell out your own country, Price said, his voice like steel. And for what? A pile of gold? A post in an Ottoman court you'll never be welcome in? Hargrave shrugged. The world is changing. England grows fat and slow. We spend all our might keeping old colonies afloat, while Persia lies waiting, rich, untapped, and boiling with rebellion. The Russians will get there first, or the Ottomans, but me, I plan to be there, advising whichever victor claims the spoils. Price's jaw tightened. And the people on this list, the men and women you're condemning to death? Hargrave didn't blink. Pawns. Price stepped forward and punched him squarely across the jaw. Hargrave toppled from the chair, blood at the corner of his mouth. Karim, meanwhile, stood still, silent and watching. There was something unnerving about him, something that suggested he was waiting for something. Suddenly a sound cracked through the night. Gunfire, then another. From outside, Meek swore. "We've got company." Price ran to the window. Figures in dark coats were moving along the villa's edge, at least 4 of them. Karim smiled for the first time. "I told you," he said quietly. "You were early, but not early enough." The escape. Bullets smashed through the glass as Price pulled Meeks down and returned fire. Hargrave scrambled for cover, but Price grabbed him by the collar and hauled him upright. "You don't get to die tonight, Hargrave. You get to face a trial." Meeks fired twice more and nodded toward the rear. "There's a tunnel below the east corridor. Old wine cellar leads out to the cliffs. I saw it when we circled. Then we move. Now." As they descended into the damp stone cellar, the sounds of boots on floorboards echoed above them. The passage twisted downward, choked with mildew, then opened to a narrow ledge overlooking the sea. They emerged into open air, the wind tearing at their coats. Below, a boat waited, a small launch crewed by French police, called in by a discreet signal Meeks had sent earlier that day. Shots rang out behind them as they raced to the boat. Meeks covered them until the inspector, still gripping Hargrave, climbed aboard. The French gendarmes fired back, forcing the last of the gunmen to retreat. As they pulled away, Hargrave sat slumped, defeated, as Marseille faded into the mist behind them. Back in London, a reckoning. A week later, Hargrave stood trial under closed proceedings, accused of high treason, espionage, and conspiracy against the Crown. The evidence was irrefutable: Price's testimony, Celeste's photograph, and the cipher scroll now locked in the vaults of Whitehall. Ali Karim, once recovered, was handed over to Persian authorities, who denied all knowledge of him. The Firebird cipher was permanently shelved, its translations destroyed. In its place, a new code was developed, simpler, less elegant, but harder to betray. One evening, in the comfort of his study, Price received a letter. No return address. Inside was a single photograph: Celeste standing near a market in Tangier, wearing a sun hat and smiling faintly. On the back, written in her elegant hand, "Ghosts never disappear, Inspector. They simply find new mirrors." Price smiled, tucked the photo into a drawer, and returned to his notes. The world of shadows was vast, and the men who walked through it rarely stayed gone for long. Chapter 6. Secrets in the Steam Room. A week had passed since Peter Hargrave's arrest. The papers speculated, diplomats whispered, but the official story released by the Foreign Office spoke only of misconduct and unauthorized communications with foreign agents. The truth, that a trusted British envoy had betrayed the Empire for gold and influence, remained sealed behind iron doors. But Inspector Harold Price had learned long ago that secrets rarely stayed buried. It was a damp and listless morning when a discreet note arrived on Price's desk at Scotland Yard. No seal, no signature, only a short message, written in a precise, serifed hand. "Not all threads have been cut. The bathhouse remembers. The man with no face speaks again." Attached was a name: the Hammam Imperial, Covent Garden. Price stared at the note, his brow tightening. The Hammam Imperial was an exclusive Turkish bathhouse frequented by diplomats, politicians, and foreign dignitaries. It was also rumoured to be neutral ground for covert meetings, an oasis of steam and silence, where whispers went unnoticed and secrets clung to tile like condensation. He folded the note, tucked it into his coat, and stood. "Meeks," he called, stepping into the outer office. "We're going for a steam." The interior of the bathhouse was a palace of tile and silence. Mosaics lined the high-vaulted ceilings, and brass lanterns flickered like stars in steam. Attendants in white linen robes moved like shadows, offering towels and mint tea. The air was thick with the scent of eucalyptus and orange blossom. Price entered the main steam room, a circular chamber with a domed roof and a central fountain. A few men lounged in the haze, some silent, others murmuring in low tones. One older man snored beneath a towel. A Turkish envoy smoked a long pipe in a corner. But Price's attention focused on the man seated alone on a marble bench, barely visible through the fog. He was wrapped in a white cloth, face turned away. Then softly, the man spoke. "I didn't think you'd come alone." Price recognized the voice, cultured, wry, too precise to be natural. "Thaddeus Morin," he said. "I wondered when your name would surface." The man turned slightly, and for the first time, Price saw him. Clean-shaven, bald, with unnervingly pale eyes. Morin was a name whispered inside the corridors of Whitehall, a retired intelligence clerk who had once worked in the shadow bureaucracy behind the Foreign Office. Officially, he didn't exist. Unofficially, he knew everything. "I came because I read your report," Morin said, voice hushed. "Hargrave, Karim, the cipher scroll. It's a fine tangle, but it's not over." Price leaned forward. "Then speak." Morin sipped his tea. "You recovered the scroll, but that was only a portion of it. There were two. Sir Julian had divided the cipher and entrusted the second half to another man, Arthur Silbury, stationed in Istanbul." "I've heard the name," Price said. "British attaché, died of cholera 6 months ago." Morin gave a faint smile. "Died, yes, but not of cholera." Price frowned. "Murder?" Morin nodded. "Silbury was poisoned in his residence just days after receiving the second half of the Firebird cipher. The message was clear: you're next. Hargrave got spooked and tried to hide his tracks, but the second half of the cipher vanished, and it hasn't resurfaced." "Who has it?" "No one knows," Morin said, voice growing quieter. "But they're looking for it. Russians, Persians, Germans, and one man in particular, a former associate of Karim, a courier with many names, but one mark." "A mark?" Morin reached beneath his robe and handed Price a crumpled photograph. It was grainy, taken in shadow, but it showed a man with a deep scar running from the corner of his eye to his jawline. Nicholas Vierek, born in Vienna, trained in Paris, speaks 7 languages, has worked for 3 empires. He was spotted in London 2 nights ago, and if he's here, it means someone is planning to finish what Hargrave started. Price studied the photo. "Why come to me?" "Because I no longer have a desk, Inspector, but you have the badge, the resources, the ear of the yard." Morin stood, folding his towel. "The second half of the cipher is still out there, and if Vierek finds it before you do, London's secrets may not stay in London." Then he was gone, vanishing into the mist like smoke in a gust. That night, Price returned to his flat off Grosvenor Square, mind racing. Vierek, Silbury, a second cipher. He felt the weight of a plot larger than he had anticipated, one not confined to Hargrave or Marseille. As he poured himself a whiskey and sat by the fire, a soft knock came at the door. He opened it to find a boy, freckled, red-haired, clutching a brown envelope. "For you, sir," from a lady. Inside was a brief message, typed on hotel stationery, from Tangier. "Nicholas Vierek was last seen boarding a steamer in Gibraltar. I followed him as far as Lisbon. He is coming for the rest of the cipher. Protect the name Rakesh. It is hidden within the scroll. It is the key." Price stared at the letter. What was this name, he wondered? Was it a person, a location, or a password? And whoever, or whatever it was, someone was already hunting it. The next morning, Price arrived early at the yard and summoned Meeks to his office. "We're dealing with more than a rogue diplomat," he said. "We're dealing with a war in shadow. The Firebird cipher wasn't a single scroll, it was a pair. And the second part is missing. The key name is Rakesh. We need to trace Arthur Silbury's possessions, his last correspondences, and, if possible, his entire staff in Istanbul. Meek scribbled furiously. What about Virek? If he's in London, Price said, he won't be subtle, but we need to stay ahead of him. He turned to the map on the wall. The Firebird Cipher was no longer just a threat to Britain's eastern operations. It was a blueprint for collapse. And somewhere, in London's fog and corridors of power, Nicholas Virek was already hunting its final piece. Chapter 7. The Cipher is broken. The fog that rolled across London's streets that night was thick and heavy, where faces disappeared, and where men like Nicholas Virek could vanish into the mist just as quickly as they appeared. But Inspector Price was ready. He stood in the records chamber beneath Scotland Yard, surrounded by dust and silence. Beside him lay the decoded copy of the Firebird Cipher, taken from Hargrave's failed handover in Marseille. But it was incomplete. One half of the code, a map of danger without a compass. Price stared at the faded ink, his eyes drawn again and again to the strange sequence of symbols that ended with a word. Rakesh, not a location, not a date, a name, but who or what was Rakesh? That morning, Meeks had returned from the Foreign Office archives with a stack of files smuggled from the late Arthur Silbury's residence in Istanbul. Most were mundane, diplomatic briefings, dinner invitations, and dull correspondence with colonial officials. But tucked at the bottom of one leather folder was a sealed envelope, addressed not to the Foreign Office, but to Sir Julian Trent, dated 6 months before his death. The letter was short. Julian, the second scroll is secure. I've entrusted it to the only man who can understand it. One of our local assets. Goes by the alias Rakesh. Real name unknown. Indian-born, educated in Oxford, now working as a librarian under the Anglo-Persian Institute in Delhi. Should anything happen to me, find him. He knows what to do. Arthur. Price sat back, the pieces clicking into place. Rakesh wasn't a cipher. He was the key. A man. And if Virek knew this, he'd be looking for Rakesh too, which meant they were already in a race. The embassy trap. Price moved fast. He wired the British consulate in Delhi, requesting immediate intelligence on anyone under the alias Rakesh attached to Persian antiquities. He also alerted the Yard's internal security to begin tracking any foreign nationals who had entered London through Lisbon or Gibraltar under false identities. 2 hours later, a message arrived via secure courier. Suspect identified. Nicholas Virek entered London under the name Emil Voran. Currently residing under diplomatic exemption at the Austrian embassy on Belgrave Square. A bold move, using the protection of an embassy as a shield. Price knew they couldn't simply arrest Virek, not without causing a diplomatic rupture, but they didn't need to. They needed to trap him. That evening, Price arranged for a leak to be passed through channels known to be monitored by foreign agents. It claimed that the Yard had secured a man named Rakesh, a librarian turned intelligence courier, and that he would be quietly moved through Victoria Station at midnight, en route to the Foreign Office for a debriefing. It was a lie, but if Virek took the bait, it would be enough. The vast echoing space of Victoria Station was eerily quiet at midnight. A handful of porters moved slowly under the yellow glow of gaslights. The distant rumble of a late-night train echoed through the arches. In a private waiting room, a decoy agent, dressed as an Indian librarian with round spectacles and a nervous gait, sat reading a book on Persian history. Outside, concealed behind columns and pillars, Price, Meeks, and a squad of plainclothes officers waited. At exactly 12:07 a.m. he appeared. Nicholas Virek, wrapped in a heavy wool coat, his pale scar unmistakable beneath his collar, moving with the predatory grace of a panther. He approached the waiting room door, glancing both ways before slipping inside. Inside, the decoy stood, startled. Virek smiled faintly. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said softly, "only to retrieve what was lost." He reached into his coat. That was the cue. The doors burst open. Price and Meeks stormed in. "Step away," Price barked. "Hands in the air, Virek." Virek spun, a pistol already drawn. But Meeks was faster. He fired once. The bullet hit Virek in the shoulder, spinning him backward against the wall. He slumped to the ground, groaning, the weapon clattering beside him. Price knelt over him. "Where's the second scroll?" Virek, bleeding, gave a crooked smile. "Too late. It's already in motion. I was just the collector." "Who has it?" Price demanded. Virek coughed, blood bubbling at his lips. "The future belongs to oil. Whoever controls Persia controls the world." Then his head slumped forward. He wasn't dead, but he was done. Epilogue. The final piece. A few days later, Price received a package from Delhi. Inside, wrapped in linen and sealed with wax, was the second half of the Firebird cipher, hand-delivered by a Professor Rajan, who had worked alongside Rakesh. The man himself had vanished just days prior, leaving behind a note for Price. Some truths must remain divided, lest they destroy the hands that unite them. With the full cipher now recovered, the documents were handed directly to Whitehall's Intelligence Directorate under lock and key. Hargrave was sentenced under the Official Secrets Act and imprisoned under a false identity. His name, like his betrayal, was erased from the records. Virek was quietly deported. He would never be seen in London again. As for Inspector Harold Price, he returned to his quiet office in Scotland Yard. The map of Persia still pinned to his wall, its web of red threads now finally unwound. But every so often he would take the scroll out of its case, study its patterns and wonder how many secrets had yet to be uncovered, and how many men had already died to keep them hidden.